Alright, it's time for another Trump reviews, and I think I finally gotten this rating system down to a science. So when I first reviewed the set of Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, I rated them based off of how good I thought they would be in the new meta. So looking back, we get to see how cards actually performed in the meta. So this means even though some cards might actually be good, it wasn't the right meta for them, so therefore they're going to get a lower rating than perhaps you might have expected. So a rating of a 5-star means that the card was defining a top tier deck, which is that it was like always in those decks, it's considered a staple in those decks, or it's across multiple top tier decks. A 4 is a card that's sometimes in top tier decks, or is defining in the tier 2 decks. A 3 is a card that's either or both. A card rarely in top tier decks, or sometimes in secondary decks, or is defining of the offbeat decks. Those that weren't quite competitive but saw a little bit of play here and there. A 2 is a card that's rarely or sometimes in secondary decks or offbeat decks. And then 1 is complete trash. That was pretty much never played. Weasel Tunneler is a cool troll card, but you have to draw a 1-mana 1/1. Yep, troll card. Gadgetzan Socialite is probably worse than Voodoo Doctor. Yep, worse than Voodoo Doctor. Even though Blowgill Sniper is a Murloc, its stats are too weak, the battle cry is too weak. Yep, worse than Elven Archer. Instead of playing Toxic Sewer Ooze, play Acidic Swamp Ooze. So here's something that if we had a 1.5-star category, I'd actually put it in. Because it did see a tiny bit of play as tech card against all these aggro decks, but running it down to 1 star. Instead of playing Street Trickster, play either Cobalt Geomancer or Frigid Snowball. Terrible card. A 3-mana 4/3 hired gun is not going to make it into Constructed. It didn't make it into Constructed. Blubber Baron starts off with too few stats and shares Bolvar 4 Dragons same weakness that if you top deck it, it's really bad. I'm sure some people experimented with it, but it was terrible. Backstreet Leper's stats and the effect are too weak. The 3-mana 3/1 slot. If you wanted to play something like this, play Wolf Rider instead. Exactly, and Wolf Rider sucks. Organ Greaser, 4-mana 6/3 stat simply isn't enough. 2 mana can trade into it. Affectionately known as Pack Filler. Daenerys Hogchopper's effect is pretty powerful if it is a 4-mana 4/4 charge, but the amount of times the opponent's hand is going to be empty isn't enough. Yep. Kooky Chemist is Crazed Alchemist's bigger brother. Crazed Alchemist actually sees a little bit of play. You don't really need this one. Yep, and Crazed Alchemist stopped seeing any play. Kooky Chemist wasn't good enough. Daring Reporter is a 4-mana 3/3 and at least a 4-mana 4/4 since you pass it to the opponent. You force your opponent not to draw cards, but the payoff isn't big enough. Both the meta was too fast for this to ever work, and it would never work anyways. Backroom Bouncer, the 4-mana 4/4 stat line isn't good enough. It can sometimes be a 4-mana 6/4 if you manage to trade off 2 friendly minions the turn that you play it, but even a 4-mana 6/4 I don't think is that good. Run Cult Master instead for the value, not that you can actually run Cult Master. Streetwise Investigator's 5-mana 4/6 stat line is a bit low for the very specific tech effect. Not even good when Conceal is still in the game and Gadgetzan, because you can't spend 5 mana to get rid of stealth. If you wanted to punish Taunt, you should just play Black Knight. Yep, and Black Knight wasn't played because we are in a Patches meta. It's really tough to cast 2 spells in the same turn that you play Mirrored Mana Worm, so it's not practical. Ended up very rarely seeing play in Miracle Rogue. It turns out if you conceal it, it can actually be a finisher. For that reason, I'm going to give this card a 2-star rating, and that's a generous 2-star rating. I don't think it's the ideal card to play in Miracle Rogue. Gurkfu Master is a 1-mana discount for 1 less attack on Wind Fury Harpy. Wind Fury Harpy is one of the worst cards in Hearthstone. This card sucks. Big Time Racketeer. This is the first card that is a 1-star, which isn't terrible in Arena. I actually considered, this is I think one of the only cards I considered moving to the 2-star category, but I think that there's not enough room to put in the Big Time Racketeer in a constructed level serious deck. Like, you definitely can't put in Big Time Racketeer because the Jade is so good to brand instead of Big Time Racketeer. I did rate it correctly at 1 star, and it is actually a good arena card. Wind Up Burglebot is far too weak. Did you even know this card still existed? It's real bad. Leatherclad Hog Leader is a card that punishes opponents that have a lot of cards in hand, but it's not really punishing enough and the stat line is too weak. This card is one of the examples which is a 1.5 star, but I'm rounding this one down to a 1 star. It saw a tiny bit of play as tech for anti-Reno decks. In my personal opinion, it was even a poor tech choice to bring in. Ancient of Blossom's stat line is too weak. Enough said. Terrible stats. Mayor Noggenfogger is kind of the token crazy legendary of the set, kind of like Yogg-Saron. Yogg-Saron except bad. Mogre except even worse. Piranha Launcher is too slow. Too slow defines this card. I'm going to give you a spoiler. Every single hunter card in this set ended up being rated 1 star in the post-analysis. Cabal Chemist is the only tri-card to make it into the 1 star slot. The amount of bad potions out there are so many, and it's a random potion. It's just so much worse than drawing a card, I would say. Indeed, you just ran Cabal Courier instead, if you even ran that card. So speaking of potions, Potion of Polymorph is not going to see any play. Controlling what you sheep is kind of a big deal. Turns out this card is pretty bad when you're getting beat down by patches. It's bad. You could call this a 5-mana 7/7 a lot of times, but I think the payoff is just not big enough. But it turns out you couldn't because it's way too slow. Greater Arcane Missiles. At 7 mana, you need to be able to have a spell that competes with Flame Strike and Fireland's Portal. And this card doesn't do it. Blood Fury Potion is a 3-mana Blessing of Might, which is terrible. Sea Devil Stinger is one of those 1-star cards which could possibly be good in the future, but I rated this 1 star because in this version of Standard it's not going to be good enough. As we might have learned from the Blood Magic Brawl, paying health instead of mana is really powerful, but the support for the Murlocs isn't here yet. Isn't worth it even if you already have a Reno lock deck. This one is kind of the 1.5 star deck. There are some weird Reno lock decks which actually run Cruel, but I'm fairly convinced that they're mainly used for the memes. So I'm going to round this down to 1 star still. With Pilfered Power, you can live the dream, but the dream doesn't happen often enough. Your dreams get crushed by N'Zoth's first mate. The Rogue gets a lot of entries into the 1 star, I'm afraid. I was right. That's going to be a lot of 1-star cards. Let's go through all of them rapid fire. Starting with Gadgetzan Ferryman, Youthful Brewmaster with a bit of a twist, and while you can reward the Jade Golem type of play by playing your Jade Golem creator and then bouncing it and then playing it again later, I tried to build that deck and I found it very, very slow. Even after the nerf of Spirit Claws and Small Time Buccaneer, this card isn't going to be good enough to put in the Jade combo decks. Shadow Rager is a very cute card, and it dies to Ravaging Ghoul and Maelstrom Portal, which is bad. I have to admit I was a little bit surprised to put Shadow Sensei into the 1-star category. It's a 4-mana 4/4 which has a +2/+2 buff. However, I don't think the tools are out there right now for a stealth rogue deck. It's not there yet, but maybe someday. It's a slightly better Stranglethorn Tiger, which doesn't make the cut. Probably the main problem with the stealth deck is that it's going to get outclassed by Jade. Lucky Dew Buccaneer is a card that has potential to be unfair. It's a 6-mana 9/9. But if you're looking for unfair, why not play a 6-mana 9/9 with Jade instead of this stuff? So Rogue is kind of getting the setup, I think, with this expansion. There's a lot of interesting cards, but I don't think a deck can be created. And Finders Keepers, paying 2 mana to choose a Overload card out of 3 cards isn't good enough. 2 mana draw card is really bad. So all those did in fact end up being a 1-star card. Red Mana Worm ended up being like a 1.5 star, which I've generously rounded up to 2, but one can argue that I should have rounded it down to 1. So all of those are correct, hooray. Dirty Rat is a card that I considered putting onto the 1-star category, and I probably should have, but I took pity on the rat. Dirty Rat has some very fringe applications where it can ruin combos. So here's the tricky part about evaluating cards, and something that I'm going to strive to do better in the future. When this card was reviewed, everyone was playing mid-range shaman, and this card was obviously very bad against mid-range shaman. It turns out that Mean Streets of Gadgetzan created a lot of new types of decks. There were Jade, there were Kazakus, and it turns out that a lot more cards ended up being good at being pulled out. It's also strong against super aggressive. So this card ends up being a 5-star card, having seen lots of play and inclusion in almost every single Reno Warlock deck and most Reno mage decks. Friendly Bartender. 2 mana, 2/3. It's a very minor effect of restoring 1 health to your hero, but in a very aggressive metagame, I could see this happening. Meta didn't end up being pretty aggressive, but Friendly Bartender does not quite make it, and is a 1-star card. This might be a little bit of a surprise, but I rated Sergeant Sally a 2-star. I found that there was too much setup required. Believe it or not, Sergeant Sally was pretty hyped and thought of as a potentially pretty good card. So I tempered that a lot, but apparently not enough. It turns out that a 3-mana 1/1 is pretty bad. Feloric Soulfiend has some interesting applications in Priest, but I think he's outclassed by Injured Blade Master. Even if you resurrect the Feloric Soulfiend, it is significantly worse than the Injured Blade Master because he'll keep damaging himself. This card was a lot worse with Resurrect than I had thought, but not only that, Resurrect ends up not being a thing because the meta became too fast. It's a little bit surprising to rate Auction Master Beardo a 2-star, because he is outworst at 3 mana 3/4. But the problem is 3 mana 3/4 doesn't cut it, and the effect isn't strong enough. There are some very cool combos you can do with the Auction Master Beardo, but I think those applications are too fringe to actually use. This one was featured in Kibler's Combo Priest, where you played Auction Master Beardo while you had Raza out. It wasn't a very good 1-turn kill deck, and also the meta was too fast for it. Hosen Healer. It is a 2/6 for 4, which isn't that far off the mark. It's just that the Battlecry restoring a minion to full health isn't that impactful. Turns out that instead of restoring a minion to full health, you, in this meta, needed to just restore yourself to full health. A 4 mana 2/6 doesn't stand a chance against the fast meta. Bomb Squad is actually an interesting card. The drawback is a bit too much, and this drawback turns out to have been really bad in this meta. It was a good tech card against Sylvanas in theory, but now I'm in charge. Defies Cleaner is a cool big card and has some potential if the format ever gets to a bunch of death rattles, but I don't really see that happening. It's a pretty significant commitment to put a 6-drop into a deck, and Defies Cleaner is too specific to do so. This one was theoretically 2-star level as a tech card if Sylvanas saw play, which I actually saw happening. So I guess I rated it 2 stars accurately. But it ends up being that you can't silence patches, so it ended up not being very good. Grime Street Informant, and spoiler, I actually rated every single Discover a Tri-Class card a 2-star. This one's probably one of the easier ones to explain. Why not run Novice Engineer instead? So, as a little bit of a note, I rated all 3 of the Informants lower than many people rated. I was hedging a little by putting it a 2-star instead of a 1-star. I thought it had some potential, because you can do some pretty crazy things with discovering big cards. It just ended up being too slow. Grimscale Chum. My main problem with this card is that I could not find a good enough Murloc Paladin deck. Ultimately, I decided that if you wanted to go with this Flood deck, the Zood would be better. And actually, Zoo completely got shut out of the meta, which is a huge surprise to pretty much anyone, because Zoo, by the way, at the time of this review, was a deck that everyone thought would be eternal. Turns out that Maelstrom Portal, a combination of Maelstrom Portal, Small Time Buccaneer, and patches can kill the Zoo. In a format where Zoo wasn't good enough, Zoo Paladin Murloc certainly wasn't going to be good enough. I know a guy. Turns out that instead of paying 1 mana to discover a taunt minion, of which you'll have a higher chance of discovering your class minions, you should just run those cards. Yes, there's a few good ones like Fierce Monkey and Bloodhoof Brave, but you should just run those cards. You'd have thought that maybe I would have ranked it 1 star, but maybe I saw like some kind of taunt deck coming together. That was too generous, that's a 1 star. Public Defender is a very interestingly statted card, and I do see some potential in it as well. The main problem is that it's useless on its own. Almost useless. In my defense, 2 mana for 7 stats is really good. Hand buffing as a mechanic ended up being too slow because of the fast meta, but not only because of the fast meta. Hand buffing seems like it might be outclassed by Jade, because why buff a card in your hand when you can buff a card in your field by creating a Jade Golem? This one was a tough one for me to rate 2 stars, but I actually think it is the best courier. Life Tap, Thought Steal, Arcane Intellect all outclass it. I thought that it wouldn't see play. So this is actually the first card that I'm going to have to think about which star category it does belong in. At the beginning of the meta, it did see play in every single Reno Lock and Reno Mage and Reno Priest. However, Reno Priest has kind of fallen out of favor and is considered a fringe fun deck. It is not in every Warlock deck, and it is not even in every Mage deck. But it is in a fair amount of Mage decks and Warlock decks, which are top decks. So it's either a 3 star or a 4 star. This is actually a very good example of something I would just put in the middle of a 3.5, but I'm going to round it up to a 4. This card only was potentially cut because of the oppressiveness and quickness of Patches and Small Time Buccaneer. Probably a good reason why this card ends up being better is because every single Kazakus deck runs Bran. So you do end up running the Courier and getting like 2 of these often. And a non-insignificant portion is that you can get Cabal Courier off of Cabal Courier, and you can, very importantly, get Kazakus off Cabal Courier. It just ended up being like just the right amount of flexibility, and this card ended up hitting just the right mark. 0 mana Freezing Potion has some interesting applications. It's a 0 mana spell. Every single 0 mana spell deserves to have some look into it, but the effect is just too small. I thought that this might have some applications in Tempo Mage because a 0 mana card could activate Flamewaker, and 0 mana cards are always interesting, but it ended up not being a thing. A Cabal Lackey. If there were better secrets out there, then perhaps it would have been rated more than just a 2 star. This is the type of card that I will probably rate 1 star in the future. I thought that this could possibly see play in Tempo Mage, but realistically, I couldn't actually see something like that. Cabal Crystal Runner, seen by many as a potential threat to be the next thing from below, I'm going to rate as just 2 stars. I don't think it'll work. If only I trusted my instincts more. So I do get influenced by mass crowd analysis of cards. And everyone was like, oh man, what are you thinking, Blizzard? Didn't you learn from Thing from Below? Wow, another 0 mana 5/5. Lotus Agents was one that I actually thought about putting into these Druid, Rogue, and Shaman decks, especially in the Jade decks, because it turns out there aren't that many cards with the Jade Golem mechanic. Each class has like 60 class cards, and there are only about like 2, 3, or 4 of the Jade Golem creation cards, which is a very small percentage chance of getting them. This card ends up being slightly higher than a 1 star because I have seen some Jade Shamans running it at high levels, notably Strifecrow. But it gets rounded down to a 1. Strifecrow actually realized the error of his ways, and Lotus Agents is actually not very good. 3 mana 3/4 isn't being played. 3 mana 3/3 isn't going to see that much play. It's all 0 play. Partly because of the aggressive meta, but partly because this was too difficult to accomplish. Lunar Visions. I compared this card with Nourish. So Lunar Visions is draw 2 cards. Nourish, you draw 3 cards. But the benefit of Lunar Visions is you have minions drawn cost 2 less. But here's the problem. You're front loading the mana, and then your minions drawn are costing less.
front-loading the mana is not a good thing. It's like the reverse of overload.
This card was actually being played in the early days of the meta, when people figured out that this Coon Cthulhu or even Coon Aviana combo deck could be just need a lot of card draw and could run Lunar Visions. So for that reason, it's slightly higher than a 1-star, but after the meta has settled, it's very clear that these combo decks are too slow. So I am rounding this down to a 1-star card.
Vermin Sensei. The stats aren't bad. It's 5 mana 4/5, which buffs for +2/+2, which means it's like a 5 mana 6/7. But the main problem is that Beast Druid does run a lot of cards in the 5 slot between Druid of the Claw, Azure Drake, and Stranglethorn Tiger. That it is difficult to put it in. And there's not enough cards in this expansion to buff Beast Druid more.
Beast Druid ends up getting completely outclassed by Jade Druid, basically. It's not a perfect outclass because Beast Druid can play some things in the early game to contest the early game aggression of Aggro Shaman and Aggro Warrior, but it turns out Jades do things that are way more unfair than give a friendly beast +2/+2. Instead of doing that, they're like summoning a Jade Golem, which is often more value than +2/+2. Vermin Sensei will probably never see play.
Devolve saw much hype when it was announced, but it turns out that you just play Maelstrom, Portal, Lightning Storm, and Hex instead, and there's not that, you can't fit in all the spells to deal with opponents' minions. You need some space for other things too, and those 6 cards are so good that you can't cut any of them.
So here's an interesting one. When Devolve came out, when Devolve was revealed as a card, everyone got on the hype train. Like, oh my gosh, it's a mass hex, or etc., etc. And then it completely saw no play. And then people were like, no, there's already Maelstrom Portal, there's already Lightning Storm. This card isn't actually any good. And then we actually got into the cards being released, and Devolve, in fact, didn't see play for pretty much forever. But then a deck called Mid-Range Shaman Mid-Jade Shaman started to get more popular. And actually, after the nerf of Spirit Claws and Small Time Buccaneer, I expect Devolve to get a huge boost. So to accurately rate this, this card is seeing play in some Mid-Jade Shaman, which I have called a tier 1 deck. And in fact, I'll even give it a slight rising bonus because I expect Mid-Jade Shaman to be the deck to beat after the nerfs. During this specific meta, at the time of the review, it is probably most accurately called a 3.5 star, rounded down before the nerfs, but potentially rounding up to even a 5-star card after the nerfs.
Calling the finishers. Maybe I should have rated this card a 1-star, but somewhere deep inside, I was holding out hope that a everything can happen deck would happen. What am I kidding? You just get Ravaging Ghoul, you get Maelstrom Portal. I probably mismarked this one.
Yeah, I meant to mark that a 1-drop the first time around, or a 1-star, and I just mismarked it. But at that point, I had done like so much review already that I wasn't going to go back and like make Jens have to edit it into the 1-star category. Like there's gonna be some bookkeeping errors when I write down what to rate things.
All right, now we're getting into the 3-star cards. The cards I think have some serious potential to be good. Starting with Small Time Buccaneer, a card that has the potential to be a 1-mana 3/2 is going to be good, especially since this is meant to be in a pirate deck. It's meant to be in an aggressive deck. I just wasn't sure that you would fit this card in. I wasn't sure if it would fit.
So yeah, it turns out that a 1-mana 3/2 is way better than I thought. Like, we knew that N'Zoth's First Mate existed when this card was revealed, and we knew that Fiery War Axe existed, and we knew that Pirate Warrior was going to be a thing. But even with that, I still rated this a 3-star. Why? Because I wasn't sure that only having 2 copies of N'Zoth's First Mate and 2 copies of Fire War Axe and Arcanite Reaper somewhere in there, and Upgrade, I wasn't sure that was enough for Small Time Buccaneer. But it ends up that even just Spirit Claws plus Jade Claws is enough. And certainly Rogue Weapon Up is good enough. But we didn't even see this initially as fitting into Rogue. Why? Because Miracle Rogue has never really run small minions in the past. Turns out that it's good enough in all of them. This requirement of having a weapon equipped ended up being easier to accomplish than previously thought. And it turns out that apparently 4 cards is enough to get it fairly regularly on turn 2. We didn't know that before this meta played out. We have to go back. We didn't know that. So this card is so good that it's actually getting nerfed. This is obviously a 5-star card. If 5-star wasn't going to be my top limitation, it would be higher than a 5-star, but I'm not going to be one of those people who says you can give it 110% or that it's a 6-star card. What you didn't really visualize was that this card always came with an additional 1/1 when played on turn 1, and that made it like truly over the top. It hits the limit for a 5-star card. There are actually a few of those in this expansion. Cards that are so good that 5-star doesn't quite accurately capture how good they are, but we're going to put them at 5-star anyways.
Naga Corsair is kind of similar. 4 mana 5/4 is decent. Battlecry, give your weapon +1 attack, that's decent. It feels like it's at the edge of the stat line, which is good. I just wasn't certain that it would be good enough to put into one of those aggressive decks with weapons.
So this is actually one of the ones that I think I rated higher than most people. It wasn't obvious that this card was going to be good. And this card does not see play in every single Pirate Warrior. Some people use a mixture of more South Sea Captains or Bash or Mortal Strike. Some people run the Naga Corsair, 1 copy. Very few people run 2 copies. That's enough to call it a 4-star card.
Burgly Bully. Like, the stat line is there, the effect is good. You want to play Burgly Bully to secure the board when your opponent has no minions on, and then they're forced to either play minions, which your Burgly Bully might be able to trade into well, or they're forced to play spells, which will give you coins. But here's the thing, even though coins are spells and they're kind of nice, you can use them with Gadgetzan Auctioneers, I felt like there just wasn't enough room to put this in to the deck. It's almost there, but just not quite good enough to put into the deck. But it might be.
Where I was wrong in evaluating which deck it was going to be put in. Oh, by the way, this card actually did see some play in rogue decks. Some people decided in tournaments, it was very rare, to instead of running Counterfeit Coin, to run Burgly Bully in their Miracle Rogue. But where this card really shined was in exactly Reno Mage, where most decks ended up putting Burgly Bully. Not every single deck, but most decks. I think it was popularized by Terrence. A coin is a fireball, so a 5 mana 4/6, it's better than a fireball because you get a mana. It turns out that a 5 mana 4/6, which Battlecry draws you a fireball eventually, is good enough to run in Reno Mage due to the inclusion of Archmage Antonidas in pretty much every single Reno Mage. So this card is borderline between 4 and 5-star as a card that sees play in almost every Reno Mage, but not quite enough. I'm going to say this card is a 4-star card.
Second Rate Bruiser is not in the 2-star category and has made its way into the 3-star. 3 mana 4/5 Taunt is a good card. It's going to depend on the meta on whether or not there are many minions out.
This card sees play in almost every Reno lock deck, and it sees the occasional play in Reno Mage, as well as a few other defensively oriented decks here and there. This card, therefore, will earn a 5-star rating as a card that is in a top deck, Reno Lock, and almost always, this card was a brilliant design and a check for patches, because turns out people had at least 3 minions on turn 3 a lot of the time. Also in large part because of Shaman usually having so many totems. This card saw really astounding results for the meta, I'd say.
Madame Goya is mainly a 3-star because I'm confused. She's a 6 mana 4/3. You get the choose friendly minion, swap with a minion in your deck. I felt like when I first reviewed her that I was going to need to see her in action before deciding. I kind of talked to myself for like 5 minutes to 10 minutes on the first time that I saw the card, and I still don't really know.
So I put this in this category because I didn't know, but it ends up, maybe there was some crazy combo that I hadn't seen, But it turns out there was no such combo, and it's a 1-star card.
You might be surprised to see Hidden Cash get this higher rating. But the thing with Hidden Cash is that it is quite possibly and probably going to be played for free. You might play it with Cloaked Huntress. But here's the thing also, I messed around with it a bit and I couldn't fit in like all the card buffing mechanisms into Cloaked Huntress Hunter. I'm just leaving it out there that this card might be a hidden gem.
Why was this card even rated this high? Because for 0 mana, buffing a card for +2/+2 seems in theory pretty good. But anyways, it turns out Hidden Cash sucked.
Small Time Recruits is a card that has a lot of potential. 3-draw-3 is great, but the specific deck that this fits in is uncertain at the moment.
So yeah, it's this is also a 1-star card as it turns out, because it didn't end up seeing play, but it was very difficult to evaluate as a 1-star card, and there's no way I possibly could put 3 mana, draw 3 cards as 1 star. Like, this had the potential to be a 5-star card maybe if Paladin and Aggro ended up being right, but that's the tough part of reviewing things.
Getaway Kodo is a card that reminds me a lot of Duplicate. It costs 2 fewer mana, and you can just return the card to your hand. It's like 1 mana, draw a Tyrion. When I thought about it that way, I was like, this card might actually have potential. It could also be complete trash that is never seen.
Turns out it's complete trash that's never seen, but you can understand like why it's rated a 3-star. It has the potential to be, if you play the Getaway Kodo with your Tyrion, 1 mana, draw Tyrion. Like, that's insane, right? I think it's a well-designed card. It just ended up being the wrong time for it, maybe later, maybe never.
You need to have minions out on the board to play Grime Street Protector. It's not something that's good standalone, because standalone is just a 7 mana 6/6 taunt.
It looks powerful, right? But here's an example of a card that is powerful, but has absolutely no place in this meta. A review, I think, is only useful if you can actually accurately predict how good cards are going to be in a meta. It's like, oh, is this card good? Well, it's 7 mana 6/6. It does cool stuff. Must be a good card. No, it's pretty terrible. It's too slow, and you have to also evaluate all the other Paladin cards that are alongside it. Are the tools in place so that you can actually have a board when you play your Grime Street Protector? Ends up being no. So, 1 star.
Alley Armorsmith is a card that I saw potential with the hand buffing mechanism. It's a card that gets quite a bit better after you buff it.
So this card was played in exactly 1 deck, Control Warrior. And Control Warrior pretty much always ran 2 copies of Alley Armorsmith. Not even always, actually. There's some versions of Control Warrior that don't, but those are rare. For that reason, this card gets a 4-star rating, as Control Warrior is considered not a tier 1 deck.
And I will actually personally be trying out a deck with this and a card that I rated 2-star, the Public Defender. Just these taunt minions which have high health stat values with stolen goods. The main question is whether or not the stolen goods deck is going to be good.
Unfortunately, the stolen goods deck ended up not being good. I tied Alley Armorsmith with stolen goods because I thought the 2 would be in a deck together. I didn't see a meta that was aggressive at all. So it turns out that Alley Armorsmith was good because there were a lot of low health minions. So it turned out to be independently solid in the meta, whereas setup cards such as Stolen Goods end up being complete trash.
Volcanic Potion I've rated as 3 stars. I see it as a possible addition to the Reno mage deck. And I think it's in exactly that deck where it might see a 1-of.
Like, this card would only see play in exactly Reno Mage. So if Reno Mage ended up being a tier 2 deck, then, and if Volcanic Potion only got run sometimes in Reno Mage, then this would be an accurate rating of 3-star. And that's roughly where I was thinking. But it ends up being that Reno Mage is a top deck. Without Volcanic Potion, Reno Mage would be a lot worse. Because this card is in every single Reno Mage deck, even though this card is only a 1-of in exactly 1 deck, it deserves its 5-star rating. It helps the Reno Mage win a lot of games.
Manic Soulcaster is actually also a card in exactly that deck. Shares mostly the same reasoning as Volcanic Potion. I could see this as a one-of in Reno. There's actually a few cards in Reno Mage that you would be very excited to shuffle back into your deck.
This card is actually a 4-star card. It is seeing play in Reno Mage exactly, but not always. Why is it not always in Reno Mage when Brand Kazakus Manic Soulcaster ends up being so good? It was seen as potentially too slow a card. After the Small Time Buccaneer and Spirit Claws patches, Spirit Claws nerf, I expect the Manic Soulcaster to see play in almost every single Mage deck, though. This is like a really good example of a 4.5 card, which I'm going to put at 4.
Mana Geode, perhaps a surprise. A lot of people heralded this as like the 2-drop that'll make priests great. Perhaps I actually bought into a little bit of the hype, because the more I look at this card, the more I think maybe I shouldn't even rate this a 3-star. Maybe it belongs in a 2-star. I actually have to admit, I just put this into the 3-star because I knew it wasn't going to be put into the 5-star. I knew it wasn't going to be put into the 4-star. And yet I didn't want to put it in the 2-star category because I was like, yeah, it looks good.
So here's an example of I tossed a card. Like, the 3-star category for me during this review was I'm not actually sure. And you can see how I was influenced by people. This is an example of a card that is really powerful, right? A lot of people rated it a 5-star card. The heralded Priest 2-mana powerful card, which has so much possible upside. I knew that a 2-mana 2/3 wasn't going to be that good, and I got peer pressured up to a 3-star. If I wasn't that much peer pressure, I probably would have put it at a 2-star. When you look into what decks are currently in the metagame, Mana Geode is actually just trash. It was never played, probably will never see play.
A Greater Healing Potion. I'm not sure whether or not a copy of this will make it into Control Priest. I'm not sure whether or not a copy of this will make it into Reno Priest. But it might. That's a lot of healing.
That is a lot of healing. And when Reno rotates out, Greater Healing Potion could seem pretty attractive. At this point, though, it is a 1-star card. It doesn't see play in any priest. Turns out to, even in an aggressive meta, not actually be useful enough because you're not developing your own board.
You might be surprised to see Blast Crystal Potion rated this highly. Potentially exactly a one-of in Reno luck. It could be 4 mana, destroy a minion in the late game.
So yes, this is in fact exactly a one-of in a Reno lock deck. It's not in every single Reno lock deck, but unlike Manic Soulcaster, I would say it's probably in way more percentage of Reno lock decks. So therefore, it's a 5-star card.
Mark of the Lotus. Sure looks good. Power of the Wild's +1/+, side at a 1-mana discount. The reason why this is at 3 stars is because I'm not sure whether or not it makes it into the Token Druid deck.
Token Druid decks were crowded out because Patch's decks were kind of stronger and they made sure that they could kill all your stuff before you could actually buff them with cards such as Mark of the Lotus. But could be something that reappears as an archetype later.
You might be surprised to see Shaku the Collector here. Maybe you thought it was worse, but I see great potential in Shaku the Collector. Maybe there's enough cards out there of burglary to make the Ethereal Peddler deck now. Maybe there's enough to make a Tempo Rogue deck a thing. I'll be trying this card out.
Shaku the Collector, seen by many as a joke card, and initially, and lamented as in, why did Rogue get 0 good cards? Shaku the Collector ends up surprising many people, and seeing play occasionally in Miracle Rogue, and almost always in Aggro Rogue. And for that reason, this is actually powerful enough to warrant a 4-star rating. Why is it such a strong card? Well, it turns out that it's the Manatide Totem effect. You are getting almost always 1 card guaranteed off of it, but the potential to get more makes it pretty powerful.
Lotus Illusionist is a card that I'm actually very excited about myself. She can transform into a random 6-cost minion. You're paying 4 mana for like a random 6-cost. And Midrange Shaman right now has openings in the 4 slot. I think it might make its way into there, but I'm not certain.
Turns out that a 5 health minion on a 4 mana card just wasn't good enough. So this is the point where the 3 stars and lower are down. For the most part, these are, as expected, mostly accurate, because it's easy to see a bad card and be like, okay, that's a bad card. And it's only very rare to find the type of card which ends up drastically overperforming. If a card does look powerful but doesn't end up being played, people look at it and be like, okay, you misreviewed that. But if a card is powerful but doesn't end up being played, like, people are just be like, that's the wrong meta. But no, I think it's more important to think cards that are not powerful enough and aren't being played, like, that's just the same thing.
We start with Mistress of Mixtures. My beloved Zombie Chow finally back. A 1 mana 2/2 instead of a 2/3. Restores 4 health to both players instead of just to the opponent, which makes it a better late game card than Zombie Chow.
Alongside Second Rate Bruiser, this card ended up being extremely good because it was an aggressive meta. So it's a 5-star card alongside Second Rate Bruiser.
Genzo the Shark. So the reason why I didn't put this in 3-star, but instead I bumped it up to 4, even though the deck doesn't currently exist out there, I feel like this will be put into the deck which runs out of cards fairly quickly. It could be Paladins with their Flood. It could be a more aggressive type of Warlock. It could be a Murloc deck somewhere out there.
So this is wrong, and let me explain why. It has been a long time since we've been in a meta as fast as this meta. We didn't expect to need our 4-mana cards to be finishers, such as Mortal Strike, instead of like being able to refill your hand and keep going. Sometimes you kill Reno decks before they can play the Reno, even if they have it in their hand. So with that in mind, Genzo the Shark drastically is way worse than I expected. I actually rated this card higher than most people did.
Finja the Flying Star. Boy, have I come a long way. The first time I reviewed this at BlizzCon, I said, slow. How good is it really to summon 2 Murlocs from your deck anyways? It turns out that it's actually really good to summon 2 Murlocs from your deck. Anything Can Happen decks play Barnes, which is a 4-mana 3/4, which summons 1 Murloc. Why is it not a 5-star? Well, I'm not sure whether or not the Anything Can Happen deck will be good enough, 1. 2, I'm not sure if Murloc decks will be a thing.
So it turns out Anyfin decks aren't really a thing, but when they do, they definitely run Finja the Flying Star. And Finja the Flying Star is so good in that deck that if you play it on turn 5, you're favored to win. Assuming you don't die to patches and stuff, but if you play it against control in turn 5, you usually win. Where this is possibly a little bit of a surprise is Frozen was one of the few players to bring a deck called, he coined Water Warrior, where in a Pirate Warrior deck, he decided to put in 2 copies of Murloc War Leader and the Murloc 2/1 Charger. It turns out that in aggressive decks as well, if you manage to attack with Finja, and you'll usually get to attack on Finja if you played on turn 5, it's a huge benefit. So where do I rate this card? It gets at least a 3-star rating for being a critical card in any Fin Paladin, which is not considered a tier 2 deck, like a subpar deck. And it managed to be like the leading card in a deck that made it to the Winter Championship, but wasn't heavily popularized. Is that a fluke, or are people going to start running Finja everywhere? The card itself is definitely powerful enough to rate 5-star in terms of effect. However, based on its performance in the metagame, I'm going to say it's a 4-star. Could easily see a rise up to 5-star.
So for Raltheon, I did the math. 6 mana 4/5, you draw at least 1 card always, and it has Taunt. That by itself, it probably wouldn't be exciting to write home about. You would just play the Azure Drake, 5 mana 4/4, draw a card. You gain 1 mana, you gain 1 health, you gain Taunt. That's not too bad. You could see that conceivably. Where it really gets value is if you're playing it in a dragon deck. Suppose you're running about a third of your deck as dragons. You're going to, on average, draw 1.5 cards.
Okay, that math is absolutely correct, by the way. Here's the problem with drawing 1.5 cards, though. It includes certain circumstances where you draw 3 cards. It's rare, but it averages correctly. Most of the time, you are going to draw just 1 card. But sometimes you draw 2, very rarely you draw 3, super rarely you draw 4, like super rarely you draw 5. When you average it all together, it becomes 1.5. And it turns out that that's not quite good enough. You can't fit in this card. But part of it is also because of meta reasons. The initial review was done assuming a meta of mid-range and control. Raltheon, card advantage machine in a dragon deck? Sure. So you can see why it's rated as a 4-star, and people tried it out. It wasn't quite consistent enough.
Grime Street Smuggler. I felt a little bit strange putting this card at 4 stars, and as we get up to the 5-star area, I'm going to state the interesting thing about this expansion. There's going to kind of be more 5 stars on the concept that there's so few of the mechanic that you want in a deck. The Handbuff mechanic is good. For Jade Lotus, summoning Jade Golems is good. It's just that there aren't enough cards that do it. So you start to go into the Grime Street Smuggler. I don't think the Grime Street Smuggler is that good of value. It's with all the other Handbuff mechanisms that make the card good. But seems decent. It's a 3-mana 3/5.
This expansion was one where I rated a lot of 5-star cards because the very nature of the expansion, like I explained in the past there, is that there's Grimy Goons mechanics, there's Jade mechanics, and there's Kazakus mechanics. Not really that much Kazakus mechanics, but you needed a critical mass of them. Therefore, I'm going to be wrong on a lot of cards from the Grimy Goons. In a slower meta, the Grimy Goons cards could have easily been good. So you might lol at the fact that I gave this a 4-star card, but lol even harder when I said you might be surprised that I rated this a 4-star, I implied that I was thinking about rating it a 5-star card. And this card only got shoved down to a 4-star because I thought of all the hand buffing cards, this card was slightly weak, even though it could be fit into any of the 3 classes. So it turns out that the entire hand buffing mechanism, while interesting and while valuable over time, just gets run over by aggressive decks.
Sleep with the Fishes. I think that this is excellent with Ravaging Ghoul. You're dealing 4 damage to all damage minions except your Ravaging Gul'dan, and the Ravaging Ghoul will damage all of them first. You can put this with the Pyromancer and Commanding Shout to combo 5 damage to all minions, and have a 3/1 Pyromancer left over. Watch out for this little guy, or you'll be sleeping with the Fishes.
A lot of people are lolling about this card, but I ran 2 copies of this card in the winter preliminary. Fibonacci hit Legend rank 1 with 2 copies of this card. I think it's sufficient to say that this card is run in Control Warrior in the meta. It's not run in every single Control Warrior, though. I guess I'm going to rate this card a 3-star card.
Grime Street Pawnbroker. If you think Upgrade is a good card, then that means you're paying 2 mana for a 3/3, you're drawing a upgrade, and you're playing it. Seems great in a variety of decks, mostly those that are good with upgrades, so mostly the aggressive pirate decks.
So, aggressive pirate decks do in fact run 2 copies of upgrade, and you could look at this and be like, wow, it's a 3-mana 3/3 which comes with a free upgrade, that's pretty good. But it turns out that due to the nature of the tempo of aggressive decks, they want to have that weapon out already and swinging, and it's too slow to buff the weapon in hand.
Grime Street Pawnbroker is good with Brass Knuckles. This is a card that you might be very surprised that I rated so highly. It made it into my hand buffing Control Warrior deck, because that is 3 buffs. It's +3/+3, as long as you can hold out for the 3 attacks, which I think you can.
I thought you could play Brass Knuckles and then attack 3 times with it. That's cute, Trump. So we all want this in the future, obviously. But in a meta that is slower, this theoretically is correct. Obviously, given enough time, Brass Knuckles pays for itself. But so does Piranha Launcher, and it turns out to not actually be the right meta.
This cute little cat, Alley Cat, very simple. 1 mana 1/1 summons a 1/1 cat. They're both beasts. The 1/1 cat is adorable, absolutely adorable, and that's why the card is so powerful. No, other than that, in a world where mid-range hunter is actually running Argent Square and Fiery Bat, 2 1/1s is pretty good.
You can actually really see why this card is theoretically super good. But turns out that 1 mana for 2 1/1s is really bad compared to 1 mana for 2 1/1s and a 1/3 weapon. I'm looking at you, Pirate Warrior, who starts with the Zos First Mate and summons Patches, and gets to use their Rusty Hook to kill off your precious Alley Cat. Aggro decks are really strong against mid-range decks, and therefore Hunter stood no chance with all of its mid-range cards that they got in this expansion.
Knuckles. I was actually surprised to rate this card 4 stars. You're gonna play this with a Handbuff deck, I think. And you're gonna Handbuff Knuckles. And it's gonna have so much health. And you're gonna punch minions. And then you're going to also punch face.
When these reviews were done, people were like, yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm gonna Handbuff Knuckles. I'm gonna punch minions, I'm gonna punch the face at the same time. What an awesome cuddly gorilla. But it turns out that you die on turn 6, and you're playing like a slow card on 5. It just doesn't work out. And that's also why hand buffing in general doesn't work out.
Potion of Madness is a 3-mana discount on Shadow Madness. The only downside it has is it only hits things that are 2 or less attack instead of 3 or less attack. But boy, if that is in the meta, this is a very powerful card indeed.
So the main problem with Potion of Madness is that 2 and 3 are very different numbers. The 1-mana Small-Time Buccaneer was a 3-2. The Frothing Berserker usually gets buffed when you play it. Totem Golem is out of reach. Tunnel Trog sometimes gets out of reach. And probably the bigger problem is if they do play Tunnel Trog, it's difficult to find something to swing that Tunnel Trog into. As Dragon Priest, you could use Potion of Madness, take the brand, play Draconid Op. As Reno Priest, you could take the brand, you play your Kazakus. That was all very amazing, but it was super situational. It turns out that this card also spawned a very unexpected deck. If you play Djinni of Zephyrs, and then you play Potion of Madness on an opposing creature, your Djinni of Zephyrs gets Charge. Not really considered a top-tier competitive deck, but has gotten some fairly decent results, I suppose, in getting to Legend at least. I think it deserves its 4-star rating.
Pint-sized Potion combos with Potion of Madness. They're cheap enough to easily combo together as well. The reason why Pint-sized Potion is this high up is because it's going to make Shadow Word Horror great again.
So the shocking thing about Pint-sized Potion and the Shadow Word Horror combo is that even though this is an aggressive meta, Shadow Word Horror hits almost nothing. Because so many of the threats have 3 or more attack. You have to get to 5 mana and have Shadow Word Horror and Pint-sized Potion in your hand. So that combo ends up not working out. It's theoretically good against mid-range decks, but not actually good enough. Although it is played in Djinni Priest. It's somewhere between a 1-star and a 2-star. And I'm feeling generous. We're going to round things up to a 2-star.
Cabal Talon Priest would probably be a 5-star in any other deck, but Priest is currently lacking a 2-drop. Yes, I know they have the Geode. The main problem is Priest needs to get a foothold on turn 2. Still, I think the Cabal Talon Priest is going to be good enough to run into Dragon Priest, because Dragon Priest can play a 1-mana 2-3 and a 2-mana 2-4 with Taunt.
That actually exactly happened. This card is a 2-of in Dragon Priest, and you can see that during the review, I at least had some semblance of understanding meta and the lullness of Priest. This card in Shaman would be like grossly overpowered, but because it's in Priest, it's only a 4-star.
Cabal Songstealer, good generic minion. The reason why it's at 4 stars, not 5 stars, is because Darkshire Alchemist is a 5-mana 4/5, restore 5. That sure seemed like it would be generically good everywhere, but didn't quite make the cut. Cabal Songstealer, perhaps good.
Cabal Songstealer ends up only seeing play in Reno Priest sometimes. So it's somewhere between a 1 and a 2-star. I'm going to round it up to a 2-star, and that's a generous rounding.
Unlicensed Apothecary. Turn that you play it, it's just a 3-mana 5/5. The main problem is in the future turns. That's a really high statted minion. It'll see play in Reno Lock, probably.
That's actually pretty much exactly right, other than the fact that it's rated completely wrong. In the right meta, I think this card will come back. In this meta, though, or in the meta that I reviewed this during, this is a 1-star card.
Crystal Weaver. This card buffs your Voidwalker, your Flame Imp, your Malkazar's Imp, and your Imp Gang boss. And your Imp Gang boss's Imp. And that last one is pretty important because Imp Gang boss on 3 into Crystal Weaver on 4 could become a common play. You play your Imp Gang boss, you trade it into an opponent's minion, hopefully not killing your Imp Gang boss. You play Crystal Weaver buffing both the Imp Gang boss and the Imp. If that happens, 4-mana 7/6, and I think that'll happen a good enough amount of times that it could work.
This rating was made with the idea that Zoo was going to be eternal, but it turns out that Zoo deaths get dethroned. Crystal Weaver ends up being unplayed and gets a 1-star rating.
Jade Claws. If you can get to an average of a Jade Golem of a 3/3, which is to say you summon a 1/1, 2/2, 3/3, 4/4, 5/5, which is to say you summon 5 Jade Golems in the amount of time where a match is relevant, then it's a 2 mana 2/2, overload 1, summon a 3/3. This card is still necessary to play if you're playing a Jade Golem Shaman deck, because there are very few cards that summon Jade Golems. The cards will either all stand together or fall together. And for now, I did build a mid-range Shaman Jade Golem deck, and it looked like it could be competitive with mid-range Shaman current incarnation. This card could be good, and this entire deck archetype could be good.
Turns out deck archetype is great. And turns out that you can actually play Jade Claws without running all the Jade cards, which is kind of a surprise. You do get to the 3/3 and 4/4 golem, mostly because of Aya. And I guess a 2/2 weapon was probably underrated by me as well. This card probably is going to become the new best card in quite some time, and is a 5-star card as a staple in Jade Shaman. But not only Jade Shaman, but surprisingly aggro Shaman. Jade Lightning, same exact theory. If you're summoning 5 Jade Golems throughout the course of a game, Jade Lightning is great. If you're not, it's not going to be that good. So the surprising thing is aggro Shaman, by the way, can summon a maximum of 6 Jade Golems. That's a max. But the surprising thing is it turns out that like 4 mana 2/2 deal 4 damage is kind of good enough. But not only that, because it buffs other Jades as well. So this card is run in both aggro Shaman and in Jade Shaman, and is a 5-star card. I now remember why I rated all these Jade Shaman cards that low. Reason, it seemed obvious that if you were going to run a Jade deck, and this was the common perception at the time as well, that you were going to run Jade Druid. Because why run Jade Shaman instead of Jade Druid? You have Jade Idol, you have more Jade cards. And finally, the Jade Chieftain. You are either going to run all 3 of these cards, or you're going to run 0 of these cards, is what I came to the conclusion of, because there are so few Jade Golem cards out there. You probably summon your 5th or 4th Jade Golem along with the Jade Chieftain, which means it'll be a 7 mana 5/5, summon a 4/4 of taunt, which is 9/9 in stats, or you're going to be summoning 10/10 of stats with 5. Or you're going to be summoning an 8/8 in stats, 3/3 of which has taunt. So a lot of people are saying I was right on this rating, but it turns out that this one, given my rating guideline, is also a 5-star. Why? Jade Chieftain sees play in all the Jade Shaman decks, and Jade Shaman is a tier 1 deck. It doesn't see play in aggro Shaman though. Counterfeit Coin. I actually think it's going to see play in Miracle Rogue. So this is going to depend on whether or not Miracle Rogue is good or bad. This card, most of the time in Miracle Rogue, sees a 2 of. Sometimes it sees a 1 of. Very rarely it gets a 0 of. On the concept of Jade Chieftain, you can't actually say that Jade Chieftain is a card that's sometimes cut in the mid-Jade deck. It's run, but it's certainly one of the weaker cards in that deck. I guess for that reason, I would like to revise my Jade Chieftain rating of 5-star down to 4-star. That's probably fair to say. Counterfeit Coin also gets put into the 4-star category, I suppose. It's like somewhere between 4 and 5, but I'm going to round it down to 4. This Counterfeit Coin is sometimes cut and isn't seen as one of the strongest cards. It's like an enabler. The Rogue Jade Golem cards also get the same treatment as the Shaman ones. I'm not entirely sure whether or not there's enough support. These two are actually the only Rogue Jade Golem cards, which is astounding when you actually think about it. So is that enough to make a deck? Well, you have the Unearthed Raptor possibly getting you another Jade Golem. Could be decent enough, but just doesn't seem like there's enough support. Indeed, compared to the Shaman and Druid Jade list, it seems like Jade Rogue is coming in 3rd place. Rogue is not good enough to deal with all of this aggro, unlike Shaman, and to some extent unlike Druid too. That said though, with the nerfs to aggro, it's possible that Jade Rogue becomes good. That said, this was a review of the meta during the pre-Spirit Claws and Small Time Buccaneer nerfs. I want to say there are decks that run it sometimes, but realistically there's like no competitive Jade Rogue deck almost ever. Like it's between 1 and 2 stars. I'm rounding it down to 1 star. I think there's some potential for a Rogue in the future. Jade Shuriken
Deal 2 damage, summon a Jade Golem seems just better than the SI-7 agent in the world where Jade Golem is good. We're gonna just have to see whether or not rogues can summon enough Jade Golems.
Turns out rogues currently can't because they die too fast. So this ends up being 1 star as well. And the Jade rogue package ended up being not good enough.
It is sad, isn't it? The rogue Magma Rager took up that 1 slot that rogue could have taken for another Jade Golem card.
That's actually really true. Part of the reason why Jade Rogue isn't that good is because it has 1 less Jade slot, and I had forgotten that.
Alright, now we're on to the good stuff. The 5 stars. And we're starting with kind of a surprise to some people. Patches the Pirate looked very innocent. It's just a 1-mana 1/1 charge. So what Patches the Pirate was going to depend on was whether or not aggressive pirate decks were any good. Aggro Pirate Warrior is a real deck right now in Standard, which means they'll just be stronger with Patches the Pirate.
It turns out that Patches the Pirate, I didn't mispredict Dr. Boom. Like, some people, lots of people, mostly the masses, although pro players mostly got this right, were like, whatever, it's an extra 1/1, who cares? Turns out, extra 1/1, really, really important.
When you play your turn 1 N'Zoth first mate, you're not only getting a 1/1, you're also getting another 1/1 with charge, and you're getting in 1 damage with that.
Some people have gone as far as to say this is terrible design because you are getting something for free out of your deck, but I actually, and don't hate me please, I think that Patches the Pirate is great design. Like, yes, this effect is obviously really powerful, but it's dependent on summoning a pirate, so it really pushed like a different way to play the game. 2, it actually has a risk to it. You can draw Patches the Pirate, and that's pretty bad. In fact, there was a recent study done where if you draw Patches, like, you lose the game so much more often. So I think it is true that the problem is Small Time Buccaneer and not Patches.
Doppelgangster, which is actually one of the main reasons why hand buff mechanics are even that strong. If you're getting any buff onto Doppelgangster, it's like you're getting 3 buffs. I think that Doppelgangster will make an appearance in every single Grimy Goon hand buff card across Warrior, Hunter, and Paladin. It's going to have 3 very different styles, and I think they're all going to be great. This is the card that the Grimy Goons love.
So here's where the entire Grimy Goons House of Cards collapses. So when I reviewed the card, I did say it was going to be good across 3 classes and have different playstyles and all. It actually is not going to be good in Hunter. I tried it in Hunter, and you just can't consistently buff non-beasts enough. Do look out for this card, though, after a set rotation, because the Grimy Goons stuff is still going to be there, and this entire stuff could still work. Well, I mean, at one point, like, Evolved Shaman was a top deck. At one point, well, not even a top deck, but like a good deck. For that reason, I'm going to spare this card the humiliation of a 1-star card and give it 2 stars.
The Fight Promoter. Was Ancient of Lore good? It sure was. It got nerfed. Fight Promoter, all it takes is 2+1/+1 buffs or 1+2/+2 buff. You're playing a 6-mana 6/6, draw 2 cards. So I feel like this is going to make, alongside Doppelgangster, make the hand buff mechanic really strong.
It's easy to see like how theoretically the card is so good. It is way better than Ancient of Lore, and it is a reason why Grimy Goons could be like way better than Jade in theory. It has this synergy. It has the Doppelgangster synergy. It has the Fight Promoter synergy. And in fact, watching my own review fills my heart with hope. I mean, currently we're in a state of despair because by the time you play the Doppelgangster and Fight Promoter, you might topple over to Aggression. But in a world where there's not as much of that, this potentially is a decent mid-range deck. Potentially, if it doesn't get outclassed by mid-range Jade decks, which it could be. I won't give this card the same treatment as the Doppelgangster treatment, because whereas Doppelgangster at least saw a little bit of play with Evolve and like also the Grimy Goon stuff, this card like fell flat.
Don Honcho. That is a very powerful card because it's statted very aggressively. You add the stats together, which I believe you can do in a metagame that's slower, and I feel like the Grimy Goons metagame is going to slow down. There weren't that many aggressive cards printed. In fact, I can't even think of a single aggressive card. The general mechanics of Gadgetzan are slowly buffing your hand. They are building up Jade golems, and they are singleton decks. So, will that slow down the meta? Of course it will.
So this was the entire assumption I made throughout the entire review. I know I've touched on it a few times, but it's good to hear myself say that.
So Don Honcho, if you live to survive to play Don Honcho and the card it buffs, you're getting 7 mana for 10, 11 worth of stats. And if you get it on the Doppelgangster, you're getting 20, 21 of stats.
You have to admit that sounds really good. 20-21 for 7 mana. That's value. Unfortunately, we ended up being in a meta where this sort of value was not enough. I'm not sure if the meta turns out to not be as aggressive, if that will be viable in a world where you can get value in a number of different ways, such as brand Kazakus and such as Jade in general. Furthermore, there's also a problem that with Jade, shaman being a major thing and devolve possibly being run in that you're just going to get devolved and your buffs won't even matter. Whereas Jade decks are kind of resilient against devolve because their cards are like fairly mana cost priced for their stats, whereas when you buff like a 3 cost card and it's like a 10-11 for 3, you're going to get devolved down so hard in stats. So Don Honcho ends up being a 1-star card, and its future is a little bit unclear.
1 mana, give a random beast in your hand +2/+2. So I've also rated 2 of the Hunter beasts, buff lover cards as 5 stars, which is part of the setup for why Smuggler's Crate is great. And I've got Trog Beast Rager.
We're going to review all of the Hunter cards in one fell swoop, because they are all related to each other.
So besides 2 mana 4/3s being pretty good, see Totem Golem, which is 2 mana 3/4. You might be surprised to see it at 5 stars, but it's going to see play in the buffs probably, so it's going to be great. That's a really efficient card. It's 3 mana 3/3, but actually kind of a 3 mana 5/5 since it's buffing minions in your hand. This one's the one that possibly makes Doppelgangster really good in Hunter as well. Now, where all the synergy, the buff lovers, and why the Handbuff cards are so good is because these buff lovers exist. So this is like a double buff benefit. Dispatch Kodo is also a double buff benefit. Not only do you buff its stats, you buff the battle cry. Yeah, I think Hunters are going to have a new deck for certain. This is going to kind of be the new mid-range Hunter, I think.
Oh, how I was wrong. You know, it's like one of those comedy shows where the first joke, it's like it's okay, but when you layer 2, 3, 4, or 5 together in a row, it becomes pretty good. Like, it becomes laugh out loud. This looked like such a powerful deck, but it turned out that something way better came up. It turns out that these slightly incremental buffs just didn't cut it. Like, besides mid-range being naturally weak against aggro, this deck didn't do anything, like, unfair enough. Like, all in all, it just fell flat. Every single one of those 5 cards is a 1-star card. We're going to do the next set of cards also straight in a row.
Mean Street Marshal, which is a buff lover. You get 1 buff on this guy, and he's a 1 mana 1/2 draw a card. That's really good. So how do you buff those cards? I figure that Paladins will run decks with lots of minions in them in order to have Smugglers run, and Grime Street Outfitter be great. Wicker Flame Burn Bristle. So when you get this card to be buffed, you're getting a benefit of not only healing more to your hero, but also cards which have high attack and Divine Shield are good. And along with the card not being too bad by its own. Grime Street Enforcer is a Smuggler's run that happens at the end of every single turn. So Paladins will have 3 ways of buffing every single minion in your hand. And then hopefully you can refill with Fight Promoter and you can enjoy the benefits with Doppelgangster.
On seeing this review, you can kind of see that I thought Grimy Goons was going to be the place to be. So the problem with this Paladin stuff, I've kind of explained, but it just got ran over by the aggro decks, and it wasn't unfair enough to defeat the Kazakus decks. And after the aggro stuff gets nerfed, I'm still not certain it'll be like unfair enough to compete with Kazakus and with the Jade decks. Like, Jade decks are probably going to be the ones that are really enjoying the slight hit to the aggro decks. Every single one of these cards ends up being a 1-star. other than Wicker Flame Burn Bristle, which is arguably strong enough on itself and sees play in Anything Can Happen, which is a 2-star card.
On the warrior front, we've got Hobart Grapplehammer. Give all weapons in your hand and deck +1 attack. That just seems quite efficient. I even put this in a control deck because I had Brass Knuckles in it, and when your Brass Knuckles goes up from a 2-3 to a 3-3, it gets quite a bit better.
I see it very rarely, once in a while in aggro decks, but no, it ended up not sticking. Card's cool, but just ends up being that there were better options. Like, there were very few people who would possibly see Naga Corsair as better than Hobart Grapplehammer. But it turns out that Naga Corsair is good, and Hobart Grapplehammer is bad.
And Grimy Gadgeteer, even though the warrior doesn't have that many buff cards, the Grimy Gadgeteer is a really strong one, I feel, as it is a 4-mana 6/5 with the potential to get even bigger, because it's a constant effect of each turn give +2/+2.
I did build a Control Warrior Handbuff deck, like I mentioned, but that didn't end up really working out. I'm actually pretty sold on Doppelgangster and Fight Promoter only being playable in Paladin instead of this Warrior Madness or Hunter Madness. So Grimy Gadgeteer, though, like, past that, it's still a 6-mana 6/5, and it saw a little bit of play in Dragon Warrior, and ultimately was cut from Dragon Warrior, and for that reason, this is also a 1-star card. But this is a card that I can see being significantly stronger if the meta slows down.
Kazakus is the card that puts it all together. For the time that Kazakus and Reno are both in stand together, I feel like this is the moment for those two to shine together as a pair. So I think all of Priest, Warlock, and Mage are going to be viable Reno builds. So Kazakus seems very powerful, the spell is very powerful. We haven't actually played with it yet, but just seeing the effects seems strong. It's entirely possible that the entire house of cards of Reno will fall apart if Kazakus isn't actually as powerful as everyone thinks it is. But for now, I'm still on the Kazakus hype train.
Kazakus, more powerful than anyone could have ever imagined. Well, Reno was the only real deck that could stand up against aggro. Without Kazakus and without Reno, we would have just had aggro everywhere. But Kazakus brought balance to the world and was a force that could at least stand against these pirates.
Inkmaster Solia. This is the mage card, which will, along with Kazakus, I think make a Reno mage great.
So Reno mage is separated into 2 categories. Some with the burn version with Inkmaster, some with a more value proposition or defensive option. Inkmaster Solia didn't end up in every single Reno mage deck. In fact, for a very long time, Solia was present in 0 Reno mage decks. However, now Solia is actually in, I think, over 50%. I'm not entirely sure the division, but she's pretty popular, and I think it's a very cool effect. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a 4-star rating.
Raza the Chained is the Priest Reno entry into Reno Lock. I don't think it needs to be said that Raza the Chained is good in a Reno Priest. The only question is, will Reno Priest be good enough?
Okay, so this is going to be the start of 2 Priest cards where people will disagree with the ratings. Remember, at the very beginning of the video, I emphasized the rating criteria for cards, and Raza the Chained and Draconid Operative are the 2 cards that are going to be hit the most from my rating criteria, and I've tried to emphasize it throughout the video as well. Cards that are theoretically good but don't actually see play are not actually good enough. Raza the Chained does not see any play in this meta. Yes, it stands a deck archetype up by itself, Reno Priest. But Reno Priest isn't even tier 2. It does stand up the entire Reno Priest deck. For that reason, I'm going to say this is somewhere either a 2-star or a 3-star. I suppose I will be kind enough to give it a 3-star rating.
On the other front of Priest is the Dragon Priest, and Draconid Operative is absolutely ridiculous. Your opponent will usually have good cards in their deck, which means it's nearly as good as draw a card. Which means it's nearly as good as draw a card. Okay, fine. You guys can see the scruffy guy. The card that's going to make Dragon Priest like over the top.
So, along the same lines, Drachnid Operative only gets a 4-star rating for carrying a tier 2 deck. And you can argue that the rating system is flawed, but it's really only for like a few cards that are so absurdly powerful yet don't carry a deck. I'll make a compromise. Drachnid Operative is so powerful that even under my definition of if it's like a staple in a tier 2 deck, that it's a 4-star, I'm going to make an exception for Drachnid Operative. I think my heart just grew a little bit. We're going to rate Drachnid Operative a 5-star and go against the general rating system, because that card is that good. I think that's fair to say. It's an exception.
The card that's going to make Dragon Priest like over the top, and the reign of mid-range shaman shall be over. Dragonfire Potion. Most of what mid-range shaman has right now all has 5 or fewer health, with notable exception of Thunderbluff Valiant. But at least you'll be clearing everything except the Thunderbluff Valiant, and Mr. Stakes will be pretty sad that he'll be alone.
So remember, this review was made during the reign of mid-range shaman. Dragonfire Potion was supposed to be the chosen one. They were supposed to kill off the mid-range shaman, but shaman instead evolved into aggro shaman. Dragonfire Potion is still actually good against mid-Jade shaman, but the thing is, you can't put Dragonfire Potion in your deck because, well, you can't put 2 copies in your deck because you get run over by Patches and Small Time Buccaneer. So Dragonfire Potion gets a 3-star rating for a card that is sometimes in a tier 2 deck.
And for Warlock, even though their legendary was not any good in Reno Lock, they did get some very good cards for that deck. Enough that it will probably make Reno Lock competitive again. Fellfire Potion is a big AoE. It's just a good addition. Of course, Reno Lock will run it.
So, Fellfire Potion, a card originally run in pretty much every single Reno Lock. Eventually, Reno Lock had to keep throwing off heavier and heavier cards in order to deal with the aggro. And Fellfire Potion was one of the cards to go because 6 mana deal 5 damage to yourself was not particularly appealing when on turn 6 you were about to die. Fellfire Potion sees some very light amount of play, especially in tournaments where you can actually ban out a shaman class. For the reason that this is a card that is sparingly run right now in a tier 1 list, I'm going to rate it a 2-star card. Somewhere in the middle between a 2 and a 3. I'm rounding it down to 2. Shocking result, I think, for both Fellfire Potion and Dragonfire Potion.
Cabal Trafficker. I am a big fan of card advantage, and random demons are not as good as cards. So this is not a 6 mana 6/6 at the end of your turn draw a card, which would be absolutely insane, but it is somewhere near-ish to that. Just the stat line is so powerful enough already that any card advantage along with it is good.
I never imagined we'd be in a world where Sylvanas was not being played in Reno Lock. In a world where Sylvanas is not good enough, Cabal Trafficker is definitely not good enough, and that's because of all the aggro. It's in theory good if you want to tech against control decks, but for now, a 1-star rating.
Abyssal Enforcer. This card will also see it into the Reno deck and possibly a control deck. This could be the finisher. Maybe you don't see Leroy Faceless Power Overwhelming anymore because just big cards at the end will be good enough.
This card is actually somewhere between a 4 and a 5, but it's close enough to a 5 that I'm going to round up to a 5-star. So in Reno Lock, pretty much every single deck runs 1 copy. Actually, the only reason why it is a 5. The only reason why it might not be a 5 in terms of tournament meta is because you ban out Shaman, and then you don't need Abyssal Enforcer as much. Hellfire plus 6/6 for just 3 more mana, that's insane. Yeah, it's great.
Might be interesting that I rated a few other Summon a Jade Golem cards as 4-star, but I rate the 4 mana 2/3 a 5-star. Well, the reason is there's not that many Jade Golem cards, so if there are any Jade Golem cards, classes that work out, they will have Jade Spirit in them, and I suspect that Druid Jade Golem decks will work out.
Jade Druid turns out to be a tier 2 deck, but at least I was right on the hedge. Like, Jade Spirit is not run in Aggro Shaman, but is run in Jade Shaman, and Jade Spirit is run in Jade Druid, exactly for the reasons that there aren't that many Jade summoning cards, and Jade Spirit is one of them, therefore it sees play. So it is a 5-star.
Aya Blackpaw, a card that's going to really, really be good if you get her down on turn 6. In the world where your average Jade Golem is at 3/3, Aya Blackpaw is like one of those ace legendaries that you may or may not draw throughout the course of a game, but if you do, you're not only boosting your Jade Golems by +2, but you're getting 2 of them. I think she is safe to be called a Dr. 6.
So Jade Spirit and Aya Blackpaw, like the tragedy of a 5-star rating system is that Jade Spirit and Aya Blackpaw are rated the same star, when obviously Aya Blackpaw is way better and carries the entire thing, and you know, you could put an asterisk 6-star on Aya Blackpaw, on Kazakus, on Patches, and on Small Time Buccaneer. However, as it turns out, we are not going to stratify the categories that much, and rounding is involved. So Aya Blackpaw gets rounded down to a 5-star, I suppose, is the way to put it. This card is so insane, and I think that it's possible that the Hearthstone team didn't catch it, that it sees play in Aggro Shaman. This card, absolutely insane.
White Eyes. I think this is strong enough to justify just kind of fitting in the mid-range Shaman. It appears to be a overall good card. Better in a deck that plans on drawing cards, so you might see more Mana Tides. Maybe it'll make N'Zoth Shaman a thing.
It sees some play occasionally in Jade Shaman. For that reason, it's somewhere between a 2 and 3-star. I'm going to round it up to a 3-star card. Control Shaman plays it. Jade Shaman sometimes play it. I anticipate that it's going to see a lot more play after aggro. Like if you're targeting control decks, White Eyes is great. The only reason why White Eyes didn't see that much play is because of all the aggro.
Jinyu Water Speaker. Mid-range Shaman actually has a spot open in the 4-mana slot. This is also a very solid Control Shaman card.
This card is in fact a 5-star. It pushed Control Shaman in a bit of a direction. And like the Jade Shaman can be argued to be control. It can be argued to be mid-range. It's 5-star.
And now onto our 5-star Druid cards and my favorite for the Jade Golem deck. It turns out that if you put all the Jade Golem cards into the current Malygos Druid and you take away Malygos and the Moonfires, I think you make possibly a stronger Druid. Jade Idol is usually going to be used to summon a 1/1 Jade Golem to start off the game. However, there are going to be many games where you're going to play Fandral in the later game, and then you play Jade Idol. That's where you're going to get a lot more Jade Golem cards. Getting more copies of a card that summons Jade Golems for cheap is pretty good. It's a really good Jade Golem starter. If you get both with Fandral and the game goes late, it's really good.
So this card is somewhere between a 4 and a 5. The card is very strong, clearly, and kind of makes a Jade Druid deck, but it's not as strong as you think it is. I mean, shuffling 3 copies of a card is really slow, and in order to like get the Gadgetzan to go off with it, you need to do this very late in the game. And even with Fandral, it's not quite that good, especially earlier on, though it is very good later. Kind of for the same reason that we pushed Draconid Op and Raza like slightly upper rank, we are going to push Jade Idol into a 5-star, despite Jade Druid being a tier 2 deck.
Jade Blossom gets you your Mana Crystal and your Jade Golem. I think this is probably the weakest Jade Golem card, but just because there are so few, and because Jade Golem cards synergize so well with each other, I figure that you put in 2 copies of it as well.
It's a 2 of in every Jade Druid deck. I'm going to rate this a 4-star card because of the because it's too slow to cast Jade Blossom basically against the aggressive field.
Jade Behemoth. This is the end game Jade Golem card, and it's very well statted for the end game because you're getting a 6 health taunt and you're getting a Jade Golem. And the stats breakdown on this is pretty good.
So this card is also a 4-star. Worth mentioning that if Jade Druid as a whole were a better deck, it is worth mentioning that if Jade Druid were a better deck, then all of Jade Behemoth, Jade Blossom, and Jade Idol would quite easily be 5-star cards. It depends on the meta. I expect to see a lot of Jade Druid in the future.
And finally, on 10 mana, Coon the Forgotten King. I had been uncertain on whether or not a 0 mana 7/7 that you can only play on turn 10 would be good enough. In your current incarnation of Malygos Druid, you are almost always getting to the end anyways. You usually ramp enough, sometimes you nourish ramps. So I think a 0 mana 7/7 that you can only play on turn 10 will still be good enough. And yes, sometimes you will choose gain 10 armor.
So Coon the Forgotten King, heralded as 0 mana 7/7. We can only imagine of getting to turn 10 these days. Turns out that getting to turn 10 is a much tougher task than in the experiences we've had in the past, where getting to turn 10 was more frequent. Coon the Forgotten King, though, still cool in the perspective that, surprisingly to me, it enabled some combo decks where you played Aviana and then Coon, and then you freshed your mana crystals, and then you had 10 mana to do with all your... you had 10 mana, and all your minions cost 1 mana. And then you could do stuff like playing Brand and then Cthulhu, or Brand and Cthulhu buffer and then Cthulhu, or Malygos and then some spells. It was cool. For that reason, Coon the Forgotten King will get a 3-star rating, even though it's somewhere between a 2 and a 3-star card. And yes, against aggro, every so often you do hobble into turn 10, and then you gain your 10 armor, and it's fine.
I didn't go into rating the cards with any particular plan of how many of each I was going to put in, but I think it turned out to be a nice distribution. I've rated, out of the 132 cards, 37 1-star, 22 2-star, 19 3-star, 22 4-star, and 32 5-star. So I kind of tried to make sure to give my opinion on them instead of just hedging and put them in the middle, like 3-star. But still, only half are either really good or really bad. And then there's like enough cards in the middle. I think there's a really good variety, and I think the set is overall powerful.
I was certainly right on the set being overall powerful. Basically, all of the most powerful decks run mainly cards from the Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, an extremely powerful expansion. It kind of became overall the big theme of this standard being Pirates versus Reno. So Pirates enabled by Small Time Buccaneer and Patches, Reno enabled by Kazakus, as well as some more powerful one-ofs. Truly a very powerful expansion. When we look at the distribution of ratings, post-review there's going to be a lot more 1-star cards, of course, because some of the cards are just simply not going to be viable. And then like a very small amount of 2, 3, and 4, and then 5. Because ultimately cards are either mostly played or not played, 1-star, 5-star. I expect that in my next review, I will keep with the same general idea of trying to predict the meta and then trying to come up with what cards will make it into decks that are successful in the meta.